When I first started out in this field, people would generally come to a dietitian after they had been diagnosed with diabetes or high cholesterol or high blood pressure. Now, the majority of my clients are coming to me for fitness, wellness, prevention, even those who are not professional athletes or competitive athletes, but they're just active people. They want to learn. They want to learn about how to prevent some of these illnesses that they've seen in their parents or grandparents or other family members. And that's really critical, right?
So when we coined the term food as medicine, we were talking about nutrigenomics. Because just having an orange for vitamin C is a deficiency conversation. I'm just going to plug some vitamin C into my body. When you can make genes switch on, you're having a healing conversation. So we know that in the world of obesity and genetics, we talk about heritability, which is how much is inherited from our genes that will determine how I look or act or disease or anything. And in genetics of weight or obesity, it ranges between 40 and 80%. So this idea that we can say that the genetics of weight or the genetics of cancer, the genetics of diabetes is one number can't be true, because the whole point about genetics is personalization. That we all have this different blueprint of how susceptible we are. So there are very few diseases that are 100% genetic. There are, but they're super, super rare, very, very rare.
Marshallese people, so people of the Marshall Islands, 80 years ago had no type 2 diabetes. Their diet was 60% coconut, which it may be a shock to you, but basically what we see is we see people who remain lean, who are eating whole unprocessed foods. So the foods basically as they're grown, they're eating fish and plants is what they were eating back then. But if they're eating, a lot of plants, particularly, and they don't get overweight, they don't get type 2 diabetes. We see people in the blue zones who have very, very low rates of diabetes eating their traditional diets. Well, there's a blue zone called Okinawa that's about 6 to 10% of calories from fat. There's another blue zone called Ikaria, Greece. They eat 40 to 50% of calories from fat. They don't get diabetes when they're eating their traditional diet. So that, to clarify, is really important. It's not so much the percentage of calories from various macronutrients that really matters. It's the source of those macronutrients.
We're trying to get people to do whole food, plant-based diets, which have been shown for all 4 of those issues. Lower the weights, less diabetes, less hypertension, less high cholesterol. We have large randomized trials for each of them saying that we can reduce those risk factors. And so the same thing that has been driving cardiovascular disease, and I was saying that I wanted heart disease to be number 2 before I retired, and then I got slapped in the face by the obesity and diabetes epidemic that we were in, so that the mortality rate started to go up. Well, now we're being faced with another issue that is exactly the same risk factors: hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, and hypertension. And if we could do a nutrition intervention for the entire country, started today, we would lessen those risk factors in days, weeks, and the outcome for COVID, which is going to be around for a while, very clearly, second, third waves. Every time we open up, things are going to get bad again. Well, how about protecting the population with plant-based nutrition?
We know that smoking is really bad for everyone. But remember that 40 to 80%. But for some people, smoking will be really bad, and for others, it'll be devastating. Because our ability to conjugate, to capture those smoke particles, which are toxins, convert them into something that can be excreted from our body and getting it out of our body. So we know about people who smoke cigarettes until they were 100 and they died in their sleep, right? So we all have a different responsiveness. So the other word for nutrigenomics is responsiveness. So I'm sitting with patients and I'm trying to get them to make positive behavior, I'm getting them to understand why with their genes, those behaviors that I'm recommended are not something that they read in the dietary guidelines. These are things that speak directly to their genes, not to my genes, not to your genes, and genes don't change. So if they want to live a longer, healthier, happier, better life, they need to make those changes to be able to ensure that there's a better match between their genes and the choices that they're making. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is quantity. So for some people, having 1 to 2 portions a day, or even 1 portion a day of cruciferous vegetables is enough. But if we see in your genetics that your detox is suboptimal, your oxidative stress is suboptimal, your inflammation is too high, we don't want 1 portion a day. We want 3, 4, 5 portions a day. And no one's going to eat 3, 4, 5 portions. So we try to get a couple of portions in food, and we top it up with a supplement. So it's about quantity, and it's about getting people to understand why they need to make the behavioral change that they do.
My personal philosophy is 100% plant-based, whole foods. So a whole food plant-based diet is my personal philosophy. Most people who know that and come to me want to move all the way to that or very, very close to that. So what has been shown in the research is that simply adding pulses to your diet can lead to weight loss without doing anything else, meaning you don't have to count calories, you don't have to take anything else away, just by adding them. And that's probably a triple effect. Number one, they're very satiating. So they tend to lead to eating less later in the day. So you kind of naturally curb your consumption. The other thing is that fiber and the anti-inflammatory effect, because they're so high in antioxidants and anti-inflammatories, that probably has an impact on our metabolisms in ways that help with weight management. But early on, back in the, that around 2005 or so, it wasn't well accepted among a lot of athletes that nutrition was important for performance or injury risk or disease, recovery. It was really very fringe, so I would, it was like yoga or meditation. It was kind of like, I don't need that,
I do a lot of cardio, I'm fine. Right?
Yeah, because I would have athletes who would say, I'm performing at a pro level. I have a very low body fat percentage. I got here without worrying about this. Why do I need to worry about this? So I would have to sell them on it, and really say, every time you eat, you have an opportunity to reduce inflammation, to optimize the recovery or the kind of recover from the wear and tear that you put on your body with your training or performance. You have an opportunity to optimize your immune system. Or you can do the exact opposite. You can reduce your immune function, you could increase inflammation, you could increase your disease risk, you can lower your ability to recover, which also affects your performance the next day or the next time you perform. And it was difficult to kind of get them to wrap their heads around this sometimes. Nowadays, it's changed because in that time span, we've had, Men's Health Magazine, some of these other publications where younger male athletes have been exposed to nutrition from the get-go, right? Or now most universities and colleges have an athletic department that employs registered dietitians. So they've been exposed to this idea that it's an integral part of sports medicine and performance. Athletes certainly have a lot of influence over each other. And there's been a lot of adoption of vegan and plant-based diets in, the NBA for sure, NFL, and even MLB.
The only things in a whole food plant-based diet that would raise your cholesterol would be things that have saturated fat. And so we do have concerns about palm oil and eating things like that, and even coconut. But, those aren't exactly whole food. They're processed. You take the coconut, you squeeze the oil out of it. That's a different animal, so to speak, no pun intended.
Yes.
Than having it inside of a coconut. But your point is one that I need to emphasize. That is, eating the veggie burgers, really have to look at the veggie burger and find out what's in it. Yeah. You look at the ones from the 1980s and 90s, they all were soy, which is good for you, and sodium, which is not good for you. And then you look at the ones that are out there now and the amount of coconut oil and saturated fat. And I assiduously avoid naming brands, but you probably know which ones I mean because they've infiltrated or now marketed in major fast food chains. One of them has about half the saturated fat compared to the other, or maybe even a quarter, and has lower sodium than the other one. And the one with the higher amount of saturated fat has heme iron. Heme iron is something everyone should know about. because the National Institute of Health and the AARP actually published a study from their population about the effects of heme iron on mortality, particularly cardiac mortality. That is, iron that comes from an animal is oxidized. Iron that comes from plants like kale and the like is reduced. And when you take oxidized iron, it makes oxygen radicals, and those oxygen radicals actually upset plaque. And as you know, we wanted to get rid of plaque. So I don't want my insulin levels going up, and I don't want any ingestion of heme iron.
So when you start providing the raw materials to build healthy cells, healthy brain cells, healthy cells in every place in your body, you really rebuild yourself, and it changes everything. And the other thing I think that's important to recognize is you don't have to do this in a day. You know, it can be a gradual process. And you know, you can start with one meal. You can start with one snack, just one step at a time, and you'll get there. And your body will be, it'll just be rebuilding itself as you go, and your desires will start to change. It's really quite a miracle. So a plant-based diet essentially minimizes the components of the diet that are most pathogenic and maximizes the components that are most protective. And that's why eating plant-based, it can work its wonders. And it really can. It's phenomenal to see the changes in people's health when they move in this direction.